I've been doing marketing for a long time, and a lot of my earlier career was spent in the ad agency space as a strategist. When you're a strategist in the ad agency space, something you do a lot of is write creative briefs. The creative brief is basically you working through with the client and your internal creative team, what is the thing that we're going to create? Like, what does it need to accomplish for your brand? How do you create a specific message that is going to be impactful to the people you're trying to reach? And one of the core components of this that you work through with the client is who is your target audience? Who is the type of person that's going to be the most impactful to a growing business that we should focus on as we create these campaign materials? I will say, I've written some pretty good creative briefs in my day, and I've written some bad ones. Part of the reason why the bad ones were bad is that when I would ask the client, who is your target audience? Who are we trying to appeal to? They would say, everyone. Everyone is in our target. And if you've worked in the agency space before, you know that is the absolute worst thing that you could hear, because that just gives you nothing to go off of. So much of creating marketing and messaging to support a brand, or even thinking about how you position yourself as a creator, if that's what you do, it's having an idea of a specific person that you can help or you can motivate. And when your audience is everyone, that doesn't give you anything to push off of. It's how do you appeal to everybody? That gives you no place to start from. It's really hard to make anything that is interesting if you're trying to appeal to everyone. So if you're trying to grow as a brand or as a creator, you have to be memorable and you have to be relevant. And it's really hard to do that without either having a defined niche that you play in or some sort of distinct feature that's going to help get you there. Because those things are going to help guide who is the specific audience that we need to reach to. There's a lot of different ideas at play here, but today we're going to talk about how do you get a foot within a category by either having a very specific niche or making your brand very distinct, and how those two things kind of play together and accomplish the same thing. We're going to talk about all that today and more on Brand Sauce. Welcome to Brand Sauce, where we make strategic marketing simple and a little spicy so that companies and marketers of all sizes can focus on doing the right things and doing the right things well to grow their brand. I'm your host, Joe. I have over 15 years of marketing experience in agencies, freelance, and in-house, and over that time, I've picked up a lot of useful things to do this work really well. And in that time, I have also learned a lot of ways to do this work poorly. Let's learn together, okay? All right, before we get started today, let's open up the mailbag. If you have anything you want to reach out to me on, please send me an email at brandsaucepod, that's all one word, @gmail.com. So today's message is about the restaurant industry. And this person says, hi, I've been in the restaurant business for over 7 years, serving a small market with locals and no access to tourism. We have a unique full-service, all-you-can-eat concept, but not a buffet. Over the last few months, our numbers have been dropping significantly, as much as 40% month over month, and I don't think we can last much longer. We're running lots of promotions on social, but nothing seems to work. We're getting lots of engagement, but not any bookings. What else can we do? And this person says that, by the way, recently we had to change our name due to an international copyright issue, but that's all we've changed. The concept and the food are the same, but people are telling me that they prefer the old food a little bit better. What can I do? We already ran an article in the paper saying we had to change our name. My heart goes out to this person because this is a really challenging situation. In general, the restaurant industry is tough. It is competitive, even if you're in a small market, especially as the global economy has gone through all the changes it has over the last couple of years. I think a lot of people feel maybe like they have a lot less expendable income to spend on something that feels indulgent, like going to a restaurant. And also, a lot of restaurants, just to keep up with the cost of materials and the cost of labor, have had to incrementally raise their prices as well. So it's kind of a lose-lose situation for anyone in that industry. I know it's really fickle, and a lot of restaurants don't last 2 years, let alone 7. And this whole name change thing, if I'm reading between the lines here without like actually going to this restaurant, really digging in, I think that's probably going to be the core part of the issue here. Because being in business for 7 years under a specific name that is able to build recognition and an understanding of an experience over time, if you change that name, I think people automatically understand new name means new ownership, new restaurant, new experience. It actually doesn't matter to some degree if everything is exactly the same. same. There could be additional competition coming into this market. There could be a significant shift in behaviors and attitudes based on other factors that we're not accounting for here. But I think changing a name for a restaurant or changing a name for a business in general is something that takes a lot of effort to re-educate your existing audience, your existing customers on what that change means and does not mean for them. Here's how I think about all this from the marketing lens. If you're in business for a significant amount of time, you've built up that mental availability for, there's that word, I use that word all the time, it's important, we're going to talk about it more in the episode today in the main discussion. Over all of that time, people understand what are the restaurants in our neighborhood we could go to. We could go to this place, that place, that place, and they have name. You take that name away and you try to introduce something new. Like if they understand that that previous named restaurant doesn't exist anymore, it's almost like just completely wiping the slate clean for anyone who lives nearby or someone who might consider going to your restaurant. And so running an article in the paper saying that they had to change our name, it doesn't sound like a ton of promotion around that. That leaves a big vacuum for people to put their own understanding of what that situation is. Regardless of what the reality is, a lot of people probably assume that that previous restaurant had to close for whatever reason, and whatever replacing it is something completely new. Doesn't matter that the food is exactly the same, sourced the same, prepared and served the same concept, same menu, etc. The fact that the name changed is a big hurdle for people to get over and to reintroduce themselves to, again, the same restaurant, but just a different name. That's going to take a lot of time to build up. And so I wonder if this restaurateur maybe underestimated how impactful that name change would be, and also overestimated how much their efforts into going about raising awareness of the rebrand, but not the change of the restaurant concept, would go. So in my mind, I have a lot of thoughts about all-you-can-eat restaurants. I'm not qualified to speak on that. I'm going to continue to speak purely on the marketing and branding lens of this. But I think part of the problem is probably really undershooting how much effort needed to go into promoting the fact that this restaurant is exactly the same, but it's just a new name. And maybe running some promotions around that. Maybe there's an overemphasis on social media and maybe not enough out of home or direct mail or encouraging word of mouth. So if I were to be working with this restaurant, I think what I would be doing is really doubling down and focusing on how can we make sure that we are completely saturating the market with the understanding that this restaurant is exactly the same, but the only thing that's changed is the name. And then continue to double down on the good reputation that the previously named restaurant had. You know, same great food, same great concept, same things that you know and love and are comfortable with and understand what they are. It's just a new name. Come on down, and you can run some sort of promotion around giving out swag or giving discounts for first-time returning customers, something like that. Just things to encourage people to not only get in the door, but also in an indirect way reinforce that same restaurant, new name idea. So that really gets through to people. I'll be honest, I haven't gotten any actual emails yet. That's something I pulled off of Reddit. But again, if you have a marketing question, send me an email, brandsaucepod@gmail.com. I'm happy to answer any questions in this new beginning segment that I'm going to try out for the podcast. This is episode 4. We're getting into it. So we're going to close up the mailbag. I don't have any jingle for closing up the mailbag the way other pods do. It's still early days, y'all. Let's get into the real meat of today, all right? All right, so at the top of the episode, I was talking about how a real challenge in writing creative briefs was having to start from the understanding that our audience was everyone, which is never the case. There are category shoppers. We're going to do another episode specifically on brand loyalty and why brand loyalty is a myth. But for today's purposes, I want to start with the fact that people do not shop specific brands. They shop categories of things that they like. So people do not buy just one brand of sneakers, mostly. There's always going to be a small subset of consumers who are brand loyal to one specific brand, and they buy that over and over again. But by and large, the most people who shop any particular category and like any particular product are going to sample and pick from different stores, different brands, different products within that category based on promotions, based on physical availability, based on a bad experience with one product brand, so they want to go to another one. There's a million reasons why someone will jump around from brand to brand within a category, especially high-use categories like consumer packaged goods or thinking about restaurants or fashion. And without having something that is going to be distinct and memorable about one particular brand in a category, it's going to be very easy to be just caught in the wash of the overall category. And so when you're trying to write a creative brief or trying to define a marketing strategy and you're just saying, yeah, it's just everyone, you're already setting yourself up to fail. So let's talk about how to think about ways to make a brand distinct or to help identify a niche within a category so that that brand can be memorable to people who are casually shopping that category on an ongoing basis. This is especially important to smaller brands or upstart brands that are playing in established categories. Because when you're trying to create something new and introduce something new, it can be very hard to figure out a way to mentally kind of carve a little piece out of the typical category consumer's mind of who you are and how you're different and why they should remember you. Because if you are not able to do that, you're going to get completely blown out of the water by all the established category players or by the different brands and competitors who are able to outspend and outpromote you. Being able to be distinct or having some sort of a niche is going to be invaluable to you to be able to break through and build out some understanding of those category consumers of who you are so that you're more easily remembered and considered when someone is making a purchase from that category or preparing to make a purchase from that category. Let's talk about a meaningful difference. Do you actually have one in your product compared to most of the category competitors? I will say a lot of business owners say, yes, we're very different. We're different because we care more, we do more, our product's better. But if you look at it from the customer lens, you got to be honest with yourself, because a lot of brands and a lot of owners of those brands or people who work on behalf of those brands probably have very rose-colored glasses about how different their offering actually is. You know, every time I record one of these, I'm usually drinking some sort of canned sparkling water. I'm going to talk about canned sparkling water later in this episode too. And right now I have a Whole Foods one. We were at Whole Foods. We hadn't been there in a minute. And I remember, yeah, they have some pretty good sparkling water. We like drinking sparkling water. It's cheap. It's here. Let's get it. We don't always get this one. We get a ton of different brands, and we probably need to start making it at home. And we are shopping the category of at-home sparkling water canisters manufacturers to pick out one that's going to fit our aesthetic and make sure it's going to be easy to use. And we can, get those easy cartridge kind of like swap outs and everything like that. But the fact is, like, I don't have any specific loyalty to the 365 lime. It's just what was available. And I like lime flavor. And I think this one, based on previous experiences buying the category, is a pretty good flavor. There's nothing actually distinct about this. Most sparkling waters have a lime flavor, have a grapefruit flavor. They come in a standard 12-ounce can. And even if the branding and packaging is a little bit different, even the advertising is a little bit more sassy than others, still functionally, when you're talking about sparkling water, most players in the category are this. It's all the same. So when I talk about a meaningful difference in the mind of a consumer who doesn't care about the category but shops the category, something that would be meaningfully different about this would be the shape of the can. Do you have the tall boy can? Do you have the 8-ounce can? Does it come in a bottle instead of a can? Is there something actually truly unique about the flavor of the water? Is it caffeinated? Does it have CBD or something like that in it to help you relax a little bit? Maybe be more of a hybrid sparkling water and mocktail or alcohol alternative. Those are the things that are actually different. And if you don't have those, that's okay. You can still be successful. You can still be distinct to people, but it's just not going to be on the features of the product or your brand itself. You got to create that in your marketing activities. We'll get to that a little bit later. So if you don't have a meaningful difference, and without a meaningful difference, you don't have really a specific niche audience within the category to anchor yourself to, what you need to do is have probably some distinct branding and some distinct messaging, and you need to be consistent with that messaging so you can grow over time. If you're actually different, you can use that to anchor a lot of your stuff, or it's got to be all created through the branding and marketing. Those are kind of the two ways that you can grow by having something that is going to be distinctly memorable to the people who shop your category. We're going to circle back to sparkling water. Let's take a break on it for now. A category that I worked on a decent amount when I was in the agency space was frozen pizza. Frozen pizza is a pretty big category. In terms of just the scale of it, the number of different brands that are in it. and the amount of competition that exists within that category. It's a tricky category, I'm not gonna lie. It was a fun category to work in, but it was hard because when you're marketing a frozen pizza, you are not just competing against all the other frozen pizzas. You are competing against all the other frozen convenience foods that are in the store. You are competing against pizza delivery. You're competing against pizza restaurants. You're competing against every other food delivery option that's going to be available to people. It's a much broader category than just frozen pizza. The category is convenience food. Within that category, you'll find brands that have maybe slightly meaningful differences in the product where they can kind of carve themselves out a little piece of the overall category from. But a lot of them you'll see, it's more kind of branding based. If I just start naming a couple of brands, if you understand this category, you'll probably kind of recognize what makes them a little bit different. Like if I say a Lots of Matza pizza versus a Jack's. Jack's you're going to understand to be inexpensive, decent quality. I don't mind a Jack's pizza. I'm not above Jack's pizza, but it's going to be very inexpensive. Whereas a Lots of Matza, when you think of that, it's literally, you're going to think, yeah, this is going to be a very cheesy frozen pizza. If I say Screaming Sicilian, you might think cheesy and meaty, but maybe a little bit higher end. And that will come with a little bit of price premium. There's also some fun branding and distinct branding on that. There's the literal like mustache you can take out of the back of the box. My kid loves doing that whenever we get one of those. If I say Amy's Pizza, you automatically think, all right, maybe smaller portions, still higher end, and the whole thing is like organic, healthy version of frozen pizza. Like there's literally a version that's just roasted vegetables with no cheese on it. There are dairy-free options. They used to have gluten-free options. If I say Bellatoria or some other brands, you might think of a square pizza, which might be a little bit of a distinct kind of feature. None of these are, for the most part, that unique. Like for every brand I've named, you can think of a couple of other brands or even house brands that are going to try to do the same thing as that particular brand within the category. But is there something within either the product itself, so that is maybe Lots of Matza or Amy's, or is there something just in the branding, the way you come to market, so more Screaming Sicilian, just to help you stand apart from the competition a little bit, because that's the name of the game. If you can stand apart, if you can be distinct, it's going to be easier for people to remember you. If they can remember you more easily, that just increases the chance that you have of them deciding to purchase you whenever they're deciding to make a purchase of the category. And again, for frozen pizza, that's not necessarily frozen pizza. That is convenience meals, that is comfort food. It can be a much broader category than just frozen pizza. But by having that thing that's like, oh yeah, Screaming Sicilian is fun, it's pretty good. Yeah, it's not the cheapest, but I feel like I've enjoyed it and I like doing that thing with my friends or my kids or whatever with the little mustache. I'm going to grab a couple of those because I'm planning on having friends come over later in the week or over the weekend. Or constant conversation at our house is like, it's getting to be the end of the week and we are sick of cooking. What can we have that's just going to be convenient? That's going to be tossing a frozen pizza in the oven. So again, if you don't have something specific in the product that you can kind of push off of, is there something distinct in the way that you talk about yourself or the way that you appear that can make you a little bit more memorable to anyone who is a casual shopper of the category? A couple more examples of this after the break. I think in the last 5 years, there's been a big increase in the people who have office jobs who are doing those from home. And working from home has a lot of benefits. And I love when I'm able to work from home, but it is not the same as working in the office. And for some people who work fully remote, missing out on some of those office things can be a little distracting and a little isolating. So one of the ways you can trick your brain into thinking you're in a more social environment on a day-to-day basis is either going to a work share place, paying a lot of money to do so, or maybe going to the public library, or just going to a coffee shop where there's a lot of noise and everything, but there's an easier way to do it. And that's just piping in a little bit of office white noise. And I know there's a lot of YouTube channels that have 5 hours of office noise, but here's the problem with those. It's the same loops over and over and over again. When you start hearing that same thing over and over again, it's not really the same. Your brain knows you're trying to trick it. Coffee shops are expensive, work share places are expensive, the library is noisy, and the chairs may not be as comfortable as what you have at home. So instead of relying on some subpar YouTube office white noise, now that's what I call work. Now That's What I Call Work is a bespoke and constantly updated series of 8 to 10 hour long office white noise tracks that you can listen so it feels like you're in an office when you're working from home. It's going to have dull pop culture conversations to overhear, someone being on the phone with IT to make sure PowerPoint can work, or a few coworkers having an infuriating conversation just circular over and over again about process and not going anywhere. It's like you're at work, and you're never going to hear the same thing twice. And if you upgrade to Now That's What I Call Work Platinum, as a part of your subscription, you can get an odor releasing device you can leave on the corner of your desk so you can enjoy some of those smells of the office too. That's a coworker who's wearing way too much cologne or perfume and it's stale and old. That is someone who is microwaving something horrible for lunch, like salmon. That used to happen a lot at an agency I worked at. Someone microwaving salmon. We never caught them. Or it can just be like a real stank gym bag stashed under the desk next to you. So if you work from home but you want to feel like you're a part of that office environment, you can save 15% on Now That's What I Call Work on your first 3 months using the code BRANDSAUCE. Again, save 15% on your first 3 months with the code BRANDSAUCE. And feel like even if you're working remotely, you're still a part of the team. For all the good and all that bad. I'm doing fake ads until this thing's big enough to actually have an ad break. So if you have a suggestion for a fake product you want to hear an ad read for, send me an email, brandsaucepod@gmail.com. Let's get back to it. Okay, let's talk about another category where if there is not actual meaningful distinction in your product, a way you can create it with your messaging and your marketing and your advertising efforts. So let's go back to sparkling water. Again, this is a category I spend a lot of time dabbling in as a consumer, and I am very much so a category consumer. I have brands that I like, but I will try pretty much anything, and I've tried a lot of different brands and a lot of different flavors of sparkling water. In terms of like true meaningful distinction, that's things like flavors that no other brand offers, which I think at this point, most brands have a variety of very similar flavors. This is going to be a hard one to really kind of like stake a claim in within the category. But then there's having extra ingredients like caffeine. Some brands have it, not all do, but that is kind of a meaningful difference. And that gives you an interesting way to kind of message about how this can not only be like a refreshing sparkling water, but also maybe replace that afternoon cup of coffee. You can create a lot of distinction with the way that the can is shaped or whatever other package you use is shaped, and certainly the branding within it. So the colors, the language that's used on it, the slogans that are included on the can. Again, I'm going to name a few different brands, and I think immediately you're going to understand kind of where within the category these different ones fit. So if I say Liquid Death, you're going to think tall can, you're going to think a couple of like kind of interesting flavors, and you're going to think very specific style of kind of like messaging and tone and vibe that that brand gives off. Like it is a sparkling or sometimes a still water, but it's very much a non-alcoholic alternative to a lot of similarly branded products that people can buy that you don't drink 9 to 5 every day. If I say LaCroix, you probably think of some very specific flavors and some iconic flavors for sparkling water. You also think of that can design that has kind of like that swirly 90s style art design that is just French kiss. French kiss? Chef's kiss. Holy shit. If I say Perrier, you think of, okay, maybe a little bit upscale French, that shape of the bottle, the taller cans, the green that's always consistent. And then if I say bubbly, you think of something that's probably going to be reasonably priced and have some bright coloring, maybe not as intricate as LaCroix, but something that's going to have those same flavors and a pretty good overall package. There's a ton of store brands, so there's 365, which I would say is flavor-wise, experience-wise comparable to some of the other brands I've just mentioned. There's a Target brand, Good and Gather, which has a unique can shape, but I would say the flavors and the product experience of actually drinking that, I don't think those are nearly as good as either the Whole Foods or the major brands. I would stay away. Okay, and then lastly, just for example, let's talk about sneakers. There are people who really care about sneakers. I love sneakers. I would not call myself a sneakerhead by any stretch of the imagination. I have a decent number of sneakers. My wife has some really cool sneakers, but also like we're old parents. So what we have is not what like the senior kids are going to be wearing necessarily. But there's a lot of brands that have things that are very common amongst the different brands within the category, and there are some brands that I think have really done a good job of defining themselves either through the product itself or the marketing to give themselves a little bit of differentiation from a very broad and competitive category. There's brands that really anchor themselves on a particular selling point, whether it's aesthetic or comfort or the amount of support or performance or durability or the specific sports that the sneakers can be used for. If I say Nike or Hoka or On or Adidas or Cole Haan or Vans or New Balance or Greats, all those different brands have very, very different meanings and very different aesthetics and very different kind of audiences that you might think that they're associated with. A lot of those brands maybe have very similar offerings. I would say, certainly like Nike and Adidas and New Balance, aside from the branding, the product offerings are pretty similar. They're usually in a similar price range for a lot of the different shoes you can get. The performance is pretty similar, and even the aesthetics may not be that different, truthfully, aside from the logos from brand to brand. Certainly people will put their own meaning on top of it, and that is through the marketing and advertising those brands do. But the product themselves, maybe not actually that different if we're being super honest with ourselves. Right? And again, this is one category where I will go back and I will double down on saying brand loyalty is mostly a myth. There are people who are 100% like, I only wear Nike or I only wear Adidas. But the majority of people who wear sneakers, who like sneakers, they are going to have a lot of these different brands represented in their rotation. I think what's interesting for some of these brands like Hoka and On in particular, you will see people wearing those as casual shoes. Sometimes those are maybe older people, or even I think some younger people will maybe wear a Hoka as a little bit of a fashion statement a little bit. But those brands grew in part off of very specific messaging that they did and product development they did around we have better comfort and better performance compared to either other running or outdoor shoes, or certainly trying to carve themselves out from Nike and Adidas and New Balance with maybe a more premium product, or at least that's how they messaged it. And this is a really interesting case of they maybe did something slightly distinct in the way the product was designed or what that product experience would be, and certainly in the messaging a little bit, but they were able to, both those brands were able to grow in the category of sneakers as a whole by focusing on first more of a niche audience to then kind of like build that wedge within the category as a whole. And then they expanded it out just in terms of people understanding and knowing the brand a little bit more, and then just like using it beyond the outdoor and performance type of use cases that those brands would be maybe best intended for or initially intended for. But I would say that like Hoka and On, they advertise in a fairly specific way. Like it's still to a sneaker buying audience. It's still to maybe an athlete audience or like an exercise enthusiast audience or a wellness audience. But by having it be apparent in the way that they talked about themselves and the way that marketing kind of showed up to consumers, that there was a specific niche where these brands kind of fit in, and you can use them for more than running or more than exercise or more than hiking. But because there was that focus in what they were talking about, this goes back to the creative brief example we started the episode off with, is by having a more focused and specific audience to talk to, that helped make these brands be more distinct and more differentiated in addition to whatever, product innovations they might have done. I don't know how well performing an On shoe is versus a good New Balance running shoe or a good Nike running shoe or like a Brooks running shoe, but there is that design element on the bottom that is kind of unique. But the way that they've talked about themselves, the aesthetic, how they put themselves out there, or I would say Hoka, as I think about what that brand strategy is, was originally more so focused on a slightly older population who still wanted to be active and make something that's going to be comfortable for you, so that even though you may not be the 20-year-old person you were, you can still have an active lifestyle and enjoy being outdoors the way you were without having to worry about pain or worry about stress or injury, because these shoes are going to have that much more support and that much more comfort. Again, does Hoka actually have more support and comfort than an upscale running shoe from any other of these other brands? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. But because they're able to talk about something specific they were able to better compete in a category that was very crowded because they were able to stand for something specific. And so I think in these CPG brands that we talked about, the sparkling water and the frozen pizza, those product differences are maybe a little bit harder to message on than something related to the sneakers. But I think you can maybe see kind of the through line that we're getting to here is that anything that is either a true difference or a created difference can help a brand have a piece of the category and maybe then grow within that category instead of just being, we are another sneaker and we're for everyone. We're another frozen pizza and we're for everyone. We're a sparkling water and everyone would enjoy us. Liquid Death can be drank by anyone, but their messaging and their marketing and their branding is not focused on everyone. There is a very specific person, and mostly guys, let's be honest, that you can imagine of really loving Liquid Death. I think they've done, honestly, like for just having canned water, they've done a wonderful job. All of their success is due to really effective branding and marketing work. But aside from the can looking a little bit different and having that artwork, like, is there actually anything different in that product? No. But because of the way they messaged it, the way they kind of focused in on a niche of here's someone who's going to want to drink a canned beverage, but we want them to feel a certain way when they drink it, they hope to really exploit and kind of expand the category in a really interesting and effective way. Okay, so these have been some like big examples. What do you do in these situations for your brand, yourself, the company you work on behalf of, if your product truly is differentiated and maybe would have like some niche appeal? For differentiated, another shoe brand, think of Kizik shoes. So those are the ones you can put on without, you just slip them on and they're like a full-fledged sneaker. Parents in particular, I think, kind of love those. Or if we're thinking about the beverage category, think about the recess drinks. So they've initially launched with like CBD and then they have other kind of like natural elements. It's a very specific kind of like clean can design, very millennial coded in a lot of ways. I don't say that as a negative thing, but I think if you're, that helps evoke what they are if you're not super familiar with them. I think both of those are differentiated. And I think certainly with Recess, there's maybe a little bit of specific niche appeal. If that's your brand, if you have something different that you can kind of message on that exists within the product, that's a true difference, I still think it's important to think about the overall category that you promote to. You know, for Kizik, I think they should still be advertising and promoting themselves to people who buy sneakers. But you want to have those messages layered in of how this is different. And even if the audience you're going to is this size audience of sneaker buyers, your messaging is going to be focused on this niche. So people who are in a hurry or people who are a little bit older or whatever, so that people understand, all right, within this category, this is where this brand fits in. And same with Recess too. Recess, it may not be sparkling water necessarily, but it could be the wellness curious or people who are experimenting with non-alcoholic lifestyles or are very focused on like finding ways to relax with herbal remedies. There's a lot of different products within their overall portfolio that kind of answer a lot of those different things. They could still promote to a sparkling water audience or a wellness audience or even like a supplement audience with some of their products, but with that overlay of like, here's what makes us different and specific, and here's what you get out of us. So think about what the bigger category is you fit in, have those messages about what makes you different, and also double down on some of those messages specifically targeted to your niche audience. So in addition to the sneaker overall audience, double down on messaging to people who are a little bit older and might have mobility issues. So being able to slip a shoe on is going to really improve their life. Or very specifically message to parents. It was like, hey, you're getting in and out of the house with your 3 kids, you're trying to wrangle in and out of the car. Slip on these shoes. We're going to make it that much easier for you to keep up with your kids, right? And between those two, thinking about a broad category where you can define yourself and then showing that niche audience that might really benefit or be extra interested in what you have to offer, that's how you kind of carve out some space within the category to grow. Another example of this, I think Poppy, for example, target audience, the kombucha interested kind of health and wellness subsegment, but obviously they've advertised in Super Bowl 2 years in a row now. And in those ads, their message was a little bit broader. It They're obviously targeting anyone who drinks any type of soda or diet soda, but also overlay to people who might be a little bit more interested in health and wellness. So they focused in those ads more so on the lower sugar content, not the thing that really focuses in on a niche audience with like the prebiotics that may not appeal to everyone, but like, hey, we can get a foot in the door with a broader soda audience by just talking about sugar. That's how we kind of bridge the gap and start defining ourselves within this broader overall category. So that's if you have a product with a true differentiated feature. If you don't have something that's truly different in the product itself, in the way that it functions or the way people use it or the experience they might have, think liquid death. What do you do there? Yeah, the can's a little bit different, but that's not actually a truly meaningful differentiating factor from a product perspective. It's an effective branding thing, but it's not a differentiating thing from a product perspective. So what do you do in that case where you're playing in a category and you don't have anything specifically different with your product you can talk about? You need to be very distinct in your messaging. You need to be distinct in your visual identity, and you need to be consistent. And with Liquid Death specifically, I think this is a good example of still thinking about through the way that the branding can impact the way people think about what the product is and what the brand is, kind of focus in on more of a niche audience. Guys who don't want to look like, they're not tough because they're drinking sparkling water. That's a place to start, and you expand out from there. There's all these things at the end of the day, and I'm going to keep saying this in every short form video content you might see from me. I'm going to see this in pretty much every podcast I produce here. If you go to my blog, I'm going to keep talking about this all the time. At the end of the day, what a successful brand is going to do, what a successful marketer is going to do, is they're going to say, how can I make sure that I am memorable to anyone who's interested in the category that I play in? And that can be through the product, that can be through the messaging, but the most important thing is being memorable. And all these different things we've talked about are ways to reinforce memory for people. Because if someone can't remember you and they're going to shop the category, you're going to get left behind. So if you don't have something that actually makes you different that you can message against, you got to create something different that you can message against. And I swear if you stick with it, you're going to succeed. Thanks for joining us today. This has been Brand Sauce. Please like and subscribe and rate this podcast wherever you listen to it. It really does help a lot as I'm building this thing. If you have anything you have for me, a question, feedback, comments, send them to me at brandsaucepod@gmail.com. Leave me a note on my website at brandsauce.co, or leave a comment on anywhere I post regularly. So that's YouTube, that's Instagram, and that's TikTok. It's some variation of Brand Sauce Co. Thanks so much for watching and listening, and we'll talk to you next time. If you're going to come at me because you think I'm wrong on the Target brand of sparkling waters, come at me, but I'm not wrong. Have a good one.